Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The Pharisees went off and plotted how they might entrap Jesus in speech. They sent their disciples to him with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man, and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth, and are not concerned with anyone's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not?" Knowing their malice, Jesus said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin that pays the census tax." Then they handed him the Roman coin. He said to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" They replied, "Caesar's." At that he said to them, "Then repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to Lord Jesus Christ.
In my last parish up in the North Country, I had 5 churches to take care of, these old buildings, and it was overwhelming sometimes. And to make matters worse, when I arrived there in the parish, I had a letter waiting for me on my desk from the IRS saying we hadn't paid our taxes. I guess a mistake had been made paying our payroll taxes into a wrong account. So we corrected it. We wrote the IRS back, said we've corrected the problem, all should be well. But apparently the IRS has a collections department and a letter writing department, and these two departments don't always communicate. And so even though we had paid our taxes, we kept getting more and more threatening letters from the IRS saying, "You still owe us taxes, interest is accruing, we're adding penalties." And I would go out to my mailbox every day and get letters from the IRS. And it was kind of nice, actually, because I was all alone up there in the mountains. No one else was writing to me, so at least I had some friends. Well, finally, we got this letter that said, "If you don't pay your taxes immediately, we're going to seize your property." To which I said, "That would be great. I have way too many churches to take care of. Where can I leave my keys?" In the end, our accountant told us, "You're probably going to have to pay your taxes again and copy the other department, and it should take care of the problem." We did. We had to pay taxes a second time, and the letters finally stopped. It was sad. I would go out to my mailbox. There was no more mail. But finally, a little bit, like 2 years later, I finally got another letter from the IRS saying, 2 years ago, you overpaid your taxes. And now that started a whole nother cycle. Well, the IRS and I are still very good friends. I write them from time to time just to say hi. In Jesus' time, though, you didn't want to hear from the tax collector, okay? Because in that time, you had to pay your taxes twice as well. You had to pay the temple tax to support the local Jewish leaders and the worship of God in the temple. But then you had to pay taxes to the Romans, to the empire that had taken over the country. And the Romans weren't very nice. If you didn't pay your taxes to them, they didn't write you a nice letter. They didn't charge you interest. No, they came and burned your village down or sold your family into slavery or seized your property. There was a reason why the tax collectors were the most hated people in that society and why it was such a scandal that Jesus was friends with them, because they represented everything that was oppressive about these hated Romans. And so when in the gospel today, the Herodians and the Pharisees go to Jesus and say, "Should we be paying our taxes to the Romans or not?" This was not just an easy question about tax policy. This wasn't just an opportunity to tell a joke about the IRS. This was serious business. And these two groups that came to Jesus weren't just random groups. They represented two very different answers to this defining question of the moment: should we be cooperating with the Romans or not? And so the Herodians were the ones who followed King Herod. He was the puppet king that had been set up by the Romans. And so they were the ones saying, yes, we should cooperate with the Romans. We should be paying our taxes. We should be making the best of this situation. The Pharisees were the ones who were zealous for the Jewish traditions. They were the ones saying we have to preserve our way of life, we have to undermine the Romans, we shouldn't pay our taxes, especially with the Roman money. Because remember, on every Roman coin used to pay the tax was the image of, at the time, Tiberius Caesar. And the Caesars claimed to be divine. And so right on every coin is the image of Tiberius and an inscription that reads, "The divine Tiberius, high priest." And so the Pharisees would argue, not only are you cooperating with an oppressive power by paying your taxes, you are participating in false worship, the worship of a false god. And so notice that no matter how Jesus answers here, he's sort of stuck. And this is the whole point. They've put him into a trap. Because if Jesus says, well, yes, you should pay your taxes, then the Pharisees are going to go to the Jewish people and say, this Jesus, he's a false prophet. He's teaching us to cooperate with the Romans and worship their false gods. But if he says, no, don't pay your taxes, then the Herodians are going to go to the Romans and say, this Jesus, he is telling us to rebel against you, not pay our taxes, you should crucify him. Jesus has every right in this moment to be afraid that there is no way out of this situation, no good answer here. You know, there's something about questions about money and power that can make us afraid, especially when we place our trust in those things rather than in God. And I remember back when it was in the middle of this correspondence with the IRS in my last parish, my parish secretary got a call on the phone from a scammer. And scammers use fear to try to get you to do what you want. And so this scammer, coincidentally, claimed to be from the IRS. And my poor parish secretary, who knew we were dealing with the real IRS, believed it. And so she gave out our parish credit card number to this scammer. Now, I did not become friends with this scammer, but I did cancel my credit card immediately. By the way, I've been being told that my pastor email here in the parish has been hacked. I guess Father Mark had this same problem. So if you receive an email from me, claiming to be from me, asking for money or demanding money, don't believe it. Or if you do believe it, just send your check to the parish office. I'd be very happy to start a correspondence with you. Jesus had every... Oh, by the way, I've been having a few people here at St. Mary's in the last few months come up to me and say, Father Matt, are we going to be closing our church? To which I said, no. Why do you think that? And what I began to understand was they were worried about money, maybe understandably. They were looking around, seeing there's less people coming to Mass during the pandemic, thinking maybe we're not making it financially. And so I wanted to make sure to put the annual financial report in the bulletin today. Take a look at it. It may not be quite as scary as you might think. Obviously, we're all a little bit worried about what this pandemic is going to be doing to us, but right now, the Lord provides, as he always does when we trust in him. In this last fiscal year that ended June 30th, even though we had the lockdown last spring, we were still able to balance our budget. And we received a loan, like most small businesses did, through the Paycheck Protection Program that helped us out a lot. It was interesting because usually the church doesn't take money from the government. Usually both sides there get a little bit worried about mixing church and state, mixing God and Caesar, and yet with this particular program, some of the usually concerning restrictions weren't there, and it was a response to a mandatory lockdown, and so most churches throughout the United States felt comfortable taking that money, and it did really help us. Normally, the church is funded completely through our offerings, and so thank you for your generosity. So far, in the first 3 months of this fiscal year, our collections are almost exactly identical to what they were a year ago. And so thank you for your faithfulness. Some of our other income is down, but our expenses are down too, and we're doing okay. So please, whatever you can do to be faithful to giving online, to sending in your envelopes is greatly, greatly appreciated. So let's just trust in the Lord with all of that. But you know, Jesus had every right to be afraid of the situation he found himself in. Because no matter how he answers this tax question, he's in trouble. And yet Jesus was the master of turning the tables on his opponents. And so he says, well, show me the coin used to pay the tax to the Romans. Well, where are they going to find this coin? Well, Jesus doesn't have the coin. He relies on the Father for everything. The apostles don't have the coin. Jesus told them not to bring any money with them on their belts. So in the end, the Pharisees themselves have to reach into their pocket and get the coin. And this alone completely discredits them. Because Jesus is saying, Pharisees, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth here. You're saying you don't want to cooperate with the Romans and use this false image and false gods, but you have the money in your pocket and Jesus doesn't. What Jesus is uncovering here is some corruption that was going on. These Pharisees were benefiting off the very system they were criticizing. But then he says, well, whose image is on this coin? Caesar's. Then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. And if we don't know the politics involved here, we might not understand just how brilliant an answer this was. Because in one line, not only does Jesus get out of the trap and get out of this tricky tax question, because now if the Herodians go to the Romans and say, Jesus told us not to pay our taxes, Jesus will say, no, I didn't say that. I said to give to Caesar what belongs to him. And if the Pharisees go to the Jewish people and say, this Jesus is a false Messiah, telling us to worship false gods, Jesus will say, no, I didn't say that. I said to give to Caesar what's coming to him, but to give to God what's coming to him. To give to Caesar what's in the image of Caesar, but to give to God what is in the image of God. And what is in the image of God? What is stamped? What has God's image stamped on it, like the coin had the image of Caesar stamped on it? We do. Human beings made in the image and likeness of God, in the divine image God created us. Jesus is showing us he's getting out of this trap, but he's also elevating the conversation to a whole nother level. He's saying, yes, there's a legitimate area in life for Caesar, and as followers of Jesus, we should cooperate with Caesar in his legitimate authority. We should pay our taxes. We should vote. We should participate in the political process. But he's also reminding us that we are citizens of heaven, and that while we can give Caesar our money, we can't give him our souls. We can't give him our worship. We can't give to Caesar what belongs to God, which is ourselves. Only God deserves our worship. We shouldn't put our trust in money or in power, or we should put our trust in God. That's when we're not afraid, when we put our trust in the Lord who provides for us. The church, like Jesus, doesn't get involved always in the political questions of the day, no matter how important they may seem. The church invites us to elevate the conversation, as it does when it teaches moral truth. That's the job of the church. The job of Caesar is to figure out tax policy, to figure out the best policies to implement certain things. But it's the job of God, the job of the church, to teach moral truth, as it does when it talks about abortion and the dignity of human life as a very important moral truth today. When it talks about the evil of racism, when it talks about the biblical injunction to take care of the poor and the refugee, when it talks about the common good, and when it talks about the dignity of the human person. These are important truths that sometimes nobody else is talking about, because the church is reminding us, hey, in these questions, there are human beings made in the image and likeness of God that should not just become the victims of political games. At the same time, the church doesn't tell us how to figure out tax policy or who to vote for. I've heard some people say that's because the church is afraid of the IRS. We don't want to get in trouble with the tax man and lose our tax-exempt status. But as a good friend of the IRS, we corresponded for years. I can tell you that's actually not true. The reason why the church doesn't tell people who to vote for is for a theological reason. It's because every human being made in the image and likeness of God has the ability to reason, has the capacity for judgment. And it's each of our responsibilities as faithful citizens to evaluate candidates and positions, to weigh the church's moral and social teachings, and there's some very good flyers that have been in the bulletin for the last 3 weeks to reflect on all that. I'll invite you to take a look at it. And then to make a choice of conscience. And sometimes there are no easy answers. Sometimes people of goodwill can differ in their judgments. I think what the church has a role in doing is in elevating the conversation. The church is one of the few places left in society where people of different opinions, different backgrounds, different economic abilities come together and try to form community. That talks about the common good, the good of the whole of society, and not just the good of any one group or interest. That talks about the lost art of dialogue, that it's okay to disagree with someone, just do it lovingly and do it respectfully. I've been telling some folks, I've been reading some of the biographies of our founding fathers, and something I've been reading about is how two of our early presidents, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, at the end of their life, began a correspondence and a dialogue with each other. And these two men were hated political enemies. They had faced each other in one of the most contentious elections in U.S. history, the election of 1800. They had very different visions for the future of the country. And yet for the common good, they began a correspondence. And even though they disagreed with each other, they formed a real friendship. They would go off into their mailbox and look for letters from each other every day. Adams up in Massachusetts and Jefferson down in Virginia. And in one of the great providential moments of history that reminds us of who's in charge of history, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson ended up dying on the exact same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. John Adams' last words on his deathbed were, "At least Thomas Jefferson still lives," not realizing that his once enemy and now friend had died a few hours earlier down in Virginia. Blessed Frederick Ozanam, the founder of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, once wrote in a letter, "Learn to defend your convictions without hating your adversaries, to love those who think differently than yourselves. Let us complain less about our times and more about ourselves." In a world divided, it is hard to elevate the conversation, to resist easy yes or no answers, to do the hard work of making a decision of conscience, of dialoguing with others. That's all hard work. But that's what Jesus and the church trusts us to do. We are, after all, made in the image and likeness of God.